Hot. Putin is in danger of being deposed. Top tycoons gather to plot a plot to remove the president. Vladimir Putin is facing potential mutiny as it emerged leading oligarchs are plotting to remove the despot leader from power over his brutal war in Ukraine. Pressure is growing on the Russian President Vladimir Putin for his illegal invasion in Ukraine after it was claimed the Russian elite are plotting to push Putin out. A Russian oligarch reportedly told another that it was better if Putin died from the suspected disease he is suffering. The development comes as Putin comes under the spotlight over his health, with speculation mounting that he is suffering from a severe neurological disorder like Parkinson's. Hristo Grozev, head of investigative journalist group Bellingcat, told Ukrainian journalist Dmitry Gordon he was confident the Russian elite would force out Putin, saying, "It has to happen." We listened to a recording of an oligarch very close to Putin, who tells another oligarch that it is better that Putin die from, they call the disease because he destroys Ukraine and Russia. They are actively or passively considering how to help. A number of key figures from Putin's administration have stepped down and left Russia in revolt. In late March, Anatoly Chubais, Russia's climate envoy and a major architect of Russia's reforms following the fall of the Soviet Union, quit his position. This marked the highest-profile protest by a Russian over Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And a number of oligarchs made rich by the Kremlin have publicly turned on the Russian president in recent weeks. Britain and fellow allies of Ukraine have imposed far-reaching sanctions against Moscow's wealthy oligarchs and political elite since Russia invaded its neighbor. Billionaire Dmytro Firtash said Putin cannot win in Ukraine. He said, he is never going to come out victorious. No matter what happens, Russia will lose. It's time to stop. There will be no victory. The longer this war takes, the worse it will be for the Russian people. Not just for the Ukrainian people. And wealthy Russian businessman Oleg Tinkov condemned Moscow's crazy war in Ukraine, saying 90% of his countrymen did not support it. Fellow oligarch Oleg Deripaska in March called for peace and warned Russia would be different after the conflict, which has raged since February 24. In an interview with NBC News, Mr. Firtash, 56, said he was never pro-Russian, adding, "But you have to understand that I am a businessman. And my goal is to earn money. That's my job." Meanwhile, the visible and dramatic decline in Putin's health has sparked some to question whether it has impacted his decision-making during the horrendous atrocities in Ukraine. Most recently, the Russian despot was seen on camera showing signs of hand and leg tremors in a recent meeting with his Belarusian counterpart. The shocking footage shows Putin holding one of his hands to his chest, and the other balled into a fist. But as he moves towards the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, his right thumb makes a motion which could be viewed as a spasm. He is then spotted looking unsteady on his feet and moving from one leg to another in order to balance. Putin's humiliating defeat. A Russian $36 million helicopter was picked up from the seabed. Russia has been humiliated by Ukraine after it released a video of its Mi-35M helicopter being fished out of the Kiev Sea. The wreck of the helicopter, which cost around $36 million, was pulled out of the Kiev Sea reservoir to the north of the Ukrainian capital. It had been destroyed using Stinger manpads on the first few days of the full-scale invasion. It is reported Russia has lost at least 155 helicopters since February 24. It comes as Russian forces battled on Wednesday for control of the last stronghold in Ukraine's besieged city of Mariupol, Ukrainian officials said, and the European Union proposed tough new sanctions against Moscow, including a phased oil embargo. Mariupol authorities say some 200 civilians, as well as Ukrainian fighters, are still holed up in a vast network of underground bunkers in the Azovstal steel plant, which has suffered repeated bombardment from encircling Russian troops. Civilians who were evacuated to safety this week under a United Nations-led deal voiced fear for those still trapped inside. God forbid more shells hit near the bunkers where the civilians are, said evacuee Tetiana Trotsak, who was among dozens of Ukrainians who reached the Ukraine-controlled town of Zaporizhia on Tuesday. After failing to capture the capital Kiev in the early weeks of an assault that has killed thousands and flattened cities, Russia has accelerated attacks on Ukraine's south and east, where the Azov seaport of Mariupol is its main target. Russia declared victory over Mariupol on April 21 after weeks of siege and shelling. The city is key to Moscow's efforts to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea, vital for grain and metals exports, and link Russian-controlled territory in the south and east. Ukrainian fighters inside Azovstal are fighting difficult, bloody battles against Russian troops, said Denis Prokopenko, a commander with Ukraine's Azov regiment. A Ukrainian parliamentarian said Russian forces were inside the plant. Russia's military said it would pause military activity at Azovstal during Thursday daytime and the following 2 days to allow civilians to evacuate. Humanitarian corridors will be opened for the evacuation of civilians, working personnel, women and children, whose presence in the underground facilities of the plant has been announced by the Kiev authorities, Russia's military said. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres to help rescue more people from the plant. The lives of the people who remain there are in danger. Everyone is important to us. We ask for your help in saving them, Zelensky said. Over 300 civilians were evacuated from Mariupol and other areas in southern Ukraine as part of a joint UN Red Cross operation that concluded on Wednesday, UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Ukraine Osnat Lubrani said. While this second evacuation of civilians from areas in Mariupol and beyond is significant, much more must be done to make sure all civilians caught up in fighting can leave in the direction they wish, Lubrani said. Putin's dark future in the Kremlin. Generals seek to overthrow the president for Russia's survival. Vladimir Putin is facing opposition from frustrated generals who are estranging from him because of the lack of military progress in Ukraine, Russian sources claim. As Russia finds it increasingly difficult to gain territory in Ukraine, speculation is growing that Moscow's slow advances and especially losses could lead to the downfall of President Putin, with analysts' rumor has it that he may soon face a coup d'état. Russian security expert Andrei Soldatov said, "Is it important? It matters a lot. This is the first time that Siloviki, Federal Security Service, FSB, officers have put some distance between themselves and the president." Mr. Soldatov argued that this opens up all possibilities. He told the Center for European Policy Analysis, CEPA, the Russian president has been preparing for a coup for a number of weeks because he has faced intense criticism for his special operation. Special services in Ukraine, and he purged about 150 of his spies because of repeated failures. On Monday, the British Ministry of Defence, MOD, said that more than a quarter of the 120 battalion units the regime has committed to Ukraine are now underperforming, a number that represents about 65% of the total. The Kremlin's ground fighting power. The MOD stated, some of Russia's most elite units, including the VDV airborne forces, have been consumed at the highest levels. It will probably take many years for Russia to restructure these forces. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry said that Moscow's forces had lost 23,800 soldiers, 1,048 tanks, 2,519 armored personnel carriers, 459 artillery systems, 194 aircraft and 84 cruise missiles. Adding to the loss of equipment and troops were Putin's generals and other senior officers, among them a large number of dead. James Stavridis, a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, said on Sunday the Kremlin's astonishing incompetence had resulted in a number of casualties not seen in any recent conflict. This, he emphasized, when the US entered the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, not a single general was killed in actual combat. Speaking in an interview on WAP 770 AM, he said, in modern history, there is no comparable situation of the deaths of generals. Here, on the Russian side, over a 2-month period, we've seen at least a dozen Russian generals killed, if not more. Stavridis added that the problems of the Moscow army are reflected in not only the killing of generals, but also in important losses such as the flagship Moscow in the Black Sea. It's been a bad performance by the Russians so far, he said. Whether that could lead to a coup, however, remains to be seen. Over the past 2 decades, Putin and his allies have structured nearly every core component of the Russian state to limit external threats to the regime. The Russian president has arrested or killed leading dissidents, stoking fear in the public and making the nation's leadership class rely on his goodwill for their well-being. His swift response to anti-war protests during the current attacks on Ukraine through repressive tactics including mass arrests at protests, media closures, opposition and banning social media platforms is proof of how willing he is to stay in power.